Our speaker tonight is Dr. Traci Patterson. She is the founder and executive director of Advanced Pathways and the creator of HCT, Holistic Centered Treatment Protocol. She is a clinician, certified instructor, clinical hypnotist, and an expert in CRPS and chronic pain. In addition, she holds her MD and an MBA. A lot of initials after your name there. Specializing in the treatment of chronic pain patients, Traci is helping individuals regain their lives with HCT. So welcome, everybody. I'm going to leave the screen, and Traci's going to speak, and I'll be back later. And if there's any questions, I'll try to capture them, and then we'll deal with that in the Q&A. And welcome, Traci, and take care.
Thank you, Jim. I really appreciate that, and I want to thank each and every person for joining us here today. And for those who are unable to join us live, I know that they'll be recording this session. And if you want, you can hold your questions until the end, and we'll have plenty of time for Q&A once we finish up here. So again, my name is Dr. Traci Patterson, and I want to talk to you today about something that's near and dear to my heart, and that's a holistic approach to CRPS. So start with some of the goals of the talk that we want to go over is learning about holistic treatment options, and then the importance of treating the whole person. Because when we just treat a symptom, that's when people aren't getting better, and that's typically what's being done. So when we look at treating the whole person, we're looking at physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, etc. Because we all know anyone dealing with CRPS, it's not just the pain. Also addressing fight and flight, being able to break the pain loop, how stress, anxiety, and PTSD can play into it. And last but not least, insomnia, or what we know as pain insomnia, and also coexisting conditions. So it's important to have an individualized treatment to meet your specific needs. And then one of the other goals of the talk is finding hope in what a lot of people seem to think is a hopeless world of CRPS. And my personal hope is that by the time we finish this talk and answer your questions, that you will find hope and help in treating CRPS. So before we jump in, let me tell you a little bit about who I am and why I'm so passionate about what I do. First and foremost, the big thing that I want you to hear, see, or read is that I am a CRPS survivor. I was actually diagnosed with type 2 CRPS and lived with it for over 7 years, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Now, my colleagues and friends and people that know me would say that I'm an internationally renowned clinician, a hypnotherapist, a CRPS and chronic pain advocate, a speaker, an author, and I've even had a few people say that they would consider me a trailblazer for trying to find a holistic approach to treating CRPS. But for me, I take a different view on it. I'm a believer, I'm a CRPS survivor, and I'm a person just like each and every one of you that's out there listening, whether you're currently going through the diagnosis of trying to get a diagnosis of CRPS, perhaps you've been diagnosed for many years, or maybe you're a caretaker, a family member, or even a healthcare practitioner or physician. This year, I was able to publish my book about my journey with CRPS, stepping outside the box, a journey from invisible pain to invincible living. And for me, that was the first step of many steps, because people have been asking me for years to write a book about my journey with CRPS. Now, this is not a technical book talking about all of the ins and outs of CRPS. This is a book that's an overview of my personal journey with CRPS and how I was able to basically get through it and regain my life. Now, there's also a section in there for caretakers and a reference section at the back of it too. Now, one of the things that I want you to think about as we start going through this is, if your life were a book, if your life were a story, and you were the author, how would you write your book? What would you want your story to say? How would you want your story to go? I think the one thing that we can all agree on is CRPS would not be in our book. It would not be in our story. So that's a question that I want you to think about. And that's a question that's really driven my life. And it's a question that's actually changed my life forever as I went through my journey with CRPS. Now, I personally believe that life is a journey. It's full of its ups and downs, its twists and its turns. And anybody here participating this evening that's living with CRPS is going to agree with that. There's a lot of downfalls that go with it. But ultimately, it's that culmination of these twists and the turns and the ups and the downs that will mold us into the person that we will ultimately become. For me, it was becoming a little bit more dynamic, more caring, and more understanding. For you, it may mean something completely different. Now, growing up, we've all daydreamed about what did we want to do? Where did we want to go? And what would my life look like if I could have that say-so in it? Now, I don't think any of us would have chosen CRPS or any monster even close to it. Quite the opposite. Now, we've all dealt with our struggles, and I personally have dealt with pain off and on throughout my life, a sprain, a strain, even a fracture here, a fracture there. And for me personally, I was a catcher for fast pitch softball from elementary all the way through college. And you take a lot of hits. The reality is it's not a contactless sport, so to say. Even being plowed into at home plate, you know, you're taking that hit. But, you know, what we look at is if we got that out, then it was well worth it. But the one thing that I wasn't prepared for was the pain that I felt with CRPS. It was unlike anything else that I had ever dealt with in my entire life. So I was diagnosed with type 2 CRPS, complex regional pain syndrome. And your head begins to start spinning when you're at your doctor's office and you hear a diagnosis that you've never heard of. It's characterized as that rare incurable disease. It's a debilitating neuropathic condition. And for those people on the call that are living with it, you're probably shaking your head yes right now. But unfortunately, it's also known as a suicide disease because a lot of people don't get the help that they truly need. Now, in my personal journey with CRPS, I went through 7 years that actually felt like that I was dwelling in the deepest depths of hell. And I think regardless of what your age, if you're living with CRPS, you could probably understand that statement. I went through all the traditional treatments that most of you were either going through or have been through. And that included medications, blocks, both for me, regional, local, even lumbar sympathetic blocks, because mine started in my left foot and ankle. Years of physical therapy, and I even did 2 spinal cord stimulators and a battery change. And unfortunately for me, the spinal cord stimulators caused my CRPS to spread all the way to my shoulders. Now, I'm not saying that that's normal. I'm just saying it can happen, and it did with me, unfortunately. So with the last spinal cord stimulator, in addition to everything else, it also caused a buildup of scar tissue on my dura, and I was told that if it wasn't taken out, I could be paralyzed. So when the traditional treatments failed to help me, including spinal cord stimulators, essentially I was told by my pain management doctor, from my neurologist and a neurosurgeon, that they were out of options, that they didn't know what else to do. And at that point, I was a hot mess. My CRPS had spread from the initial area in my left foot and ankle all the way up to my shoulders and even mirrored over to the other leg. So with the spinal cord stimulator was removed, and at that point in time, I really started traveling the world in hopes of regaining my life and finding a way of regaining my health. I had a really hard time wrapping my mind around the fact that there was something out there called CRPS that was incurable. And I had a hard time fathoming what would the rest of my life look like if I couldn't find the answers, and I wasn't willing to give up. So through the next 7 years, or not the next 7 years, the last 2.5 to 3 years of those 7 years, I traveled from Germany to Los Angeles to back home in Orange County in Southern California where I live, and then down to Mexico, back to Germany, et cetera, being treated at different concierge clinics around the world. I did a lot of great treatments that should have helped stem cells, and the list went on and on. But then I also did some other treatments that I would never do again and would never recommend to anybody else. The one thing I did find, though, during my personal journey with CRPS is the fact that most people were missing a huge component. Everybody wanted to treat the symptoms, or they wanted to treat it as if it were an autoimmune condition. But they weren't looking deeper at the basic anatomy, the physiology, and the biology of the body and how the body works together. And when I finally got to somebody that did look at all of those pieces, that's when I gained long-term remission. And that's when I regained my life. So for me, 2020 is my 7-year anniversary of being pain-free in long-term remission. And that's something that I want to have that resonate with each and every one of you that's watching this or listening to this. So many times we're told that it's a myth, that remission is not real. We're told that it's not possible, that it's impossible. Well, I'm here sitting in front of you and have treated hundreds and hundreds of patients on an international basis, and they will testify too that remission can be real. So for the last 6+ years, I've been treating CRPS and chronic pain patients with a comprehensive, non-invasive, and drug-free protocol called holistic centered treatment. And essentially it's looking at the individual as a whole, and it's a way of redefining that healing experience through the integration of holistic modalities with cutting-edge science. It's a 360-degree individualized approach to meeting the needs of CRPS patients, of meeting your needs and helping you to regain function and regain your life. So for those of you that are on the call that have been living with CRPS for quite a while, you already know what it is. You're living it, you're eating it, you're breathing it. It's there. But for those people that may be newly diagnosed, for those people that perhaps they have a loved one on this video conference and they're not exactly sure how to wrap their arms around CRPS, I want to take a step back and talk about what is CRPS. So let's take a couple minutes and do that. According to NIH, which is the National Institute of Health in the United States, CRPS, also known as complex regional pain syndrome or reflex sympathetic dystrophy, is a broad term describing excessive or prolonged pain and inflammation, typically starting in an arm or a leg. And CRPS, if it's newly diagnosed and it's only been a short term, they'll consider it acute, and chronic if it's over 6 months. So CRPS used to be known as reflex sympathetic dystrophy, or RSD, also Kazalja. And people with CRPS have a number of different symptoms that they deal with. Symptoms that go from coloration changes, temperature changes, swelling, in addition to the pain. Now, most CRPS cases are caused by an improper function, or shall we call it malfunction, of their peripheral nerves, or medical term C-fiber nerves. And essentially all that is a pathway to be able to carry messages to the brain. And that firing, it also can trigger the inflammation that's meant to promote healing, but when we've got a malfunction or a dysfunction, it doesn't. So historically, there's type 1 CRPS, and that's when we have an unknown etiology, or we don't know of nerve damage. Type 2 CRPS is where we know for a fact that there was nerve damage. So for myself, I had type 2 CRPS, and essentially we knew for a fact that an incision was made in the wrong place. We knew that the tibial nerves were cut into. We knew the lateral plantar nerve was nicked. So we knew 100% that it was type 2 CRPS. Now, the bottom line is they both have similar, or if not identical, symptoms, and they're both treated the same way. So with the patients that I see, what I'm noticing, and again, my opinion, is the fact that CRPS is occurring when we have the perfect storm going on in the brain and in the body. So think of that perfect storm. If you think about the incident, the accident, or whatever caused your CRPS. Now think about what that was. If it was a sprain or a strain, I know I've treated people that have been hockey players and black belts in Taekwondo and soccer players, etc. And a lot of times it's something as simple as a sprained ankle, and it's happened hundreds and hundreds of times before, and it's never been an issue and it's never been a problem. But all of a sudden this time, something's happened where instead of it healing and the body doing what it was supposed to, there's a malfunction, a dysfunction, where the brain is now sending out a signal saying that there's pain when in reality the area is healed. So when we look at the perfect storm in the brain, what we're looking at is the initial incident. And normally within a 30, 60, or 90-day period, people, and when they think about it, they'll say, you know what, I was sick, I had the flu, something happened that their immune system was down around that period of time too. And then there was a lot of stress in their life right around that period of time. And the culmination of all of these parts creates that perfect storm in the brain, where it has that ability to malfunction and start sending out the wrong signal. So what are the typical symptoms of CRPS? Pain, a burning, stabbing, gnawing pain. Some people will describe it as the feeling as if the limb or the affected area was being squeezed. Over time, you know, people can have a dip in a pain level and then do something with their activity where it causes them to go into a flare. And other symptoms that occur that where, for example, with myself, it started in the left foot and ankle, and it tried to mirror over, and eventually it did mirror over to that right side. So that's what they call mirroring pain. There's also increased sensitivity to touch, allodynia. So something that would normally be, for example, a feather touching your skin, it should tickle or not feel like anything at all. For somebody who has CRPS, it can feel like a blowtorch or like a knife being shoved into that area. We deal with temperature changes, skin coloration changes, swelling in the affected areas. When it's warmer to the touch, typically if there is a coloration change, you're going to notice a red color. When it's cooler to the touch, that's typically when we have that blotchy, molten blue, purple area around where it hurts. Now, we can also have changes in the skin. We'll notice different changes in the texture. Sometimes it's going to be really shiny and look thinner than other times. And with some people, they go completely the opposite, and it becomes thick and scaly because we're avoiding contact or even washing the area, which actually causes a buildup of dead cells, which looks like our skin is literally sloughing off, but in reality, it's not. We can also have that abnormal sweating, nail changes, and even hair growth. Some people will have excessive hair growth. Other people, the hair will just stop growing. For me and my lower leg, the hair stopped growing, and as a female, that was awesome because I didn't have to shave, especially in a painful area. Other people can deal with the stiffness in their joints, wasting away of muscles that can affect the bones, unfortunately, and then also impair our muscle strength and our movement depending on the pain and the different symptoms that you're dealing with. So let's move forward now that we've kind of done a quick overview on that and talk about how is CRPS treated with traditional medicine, or what we call conventional treatments, allopathic treatments. Most of the time you're going to be sent to a pain management doctor. They're going to evaluate you, and then when they give you that news that you are diagnosed, They're going to suggest physical or occupational therapy depending on where your CRPS is. Even in an upper extremity, sometimes they'll just suggest physical therapy, and other times it's occupational therapy. They'll probably discuss medications with you, NSAIDs, anti-inflammatories, the gabapentins, the Lyricas, and the Neurotins, antidepressants, anticonvulsants, muscle relaxants for some patients if they have a lot of dystonia or muscle twitching. And it's becoming harder for the opiates because of what they're calling the opiate epidemic, but that's a whole nother conversation and a big ball of wax right there. And then they're going to talk to you about sympathetic blocks or stellate ganglion blocks. So if it's a lower extremity, they're going to talk to you about a sympathetic block or a lumbar sympathetic block. And with the upper extremities, they're going to talk to you about a stellate ganglion block. Some doctors are talking about nerve ambulation, and that is cutting, cauterizing, freezing, etc. of the nerve. The problem is our nerves grow back. So a lot of times when they grow back after that type of procedure, somebody may have more pain than where they were at to start with. And then, of course, we have the spinal cord stimulators. We have newer versions called neurostimulators. And then we also have DRG stimulators for the dorsal root ganglion. For people that all of this fails, then the doctor may potentially talk to you about a pain pump. And, you know, essentially what that is releasing small amounts of morphine or other type of pain medication directly into your system from the inside. But most of these treatments are doing nothing more than treating the symptoms. They're treating the symptoms. The spinal cord stimulator is not going to stop the progression of CRPS. Now, it can help diminish the pain for somebody that it works well on, because it's overriding that pain signal and sending a different signal to the brain, hoping that the brain will get that signal and override that pain signal. But in all reality, it's a Band-Aid. Now, if that stimulator is going to help you function, then it's something to think about. Now, the problem that most people are dealing with CRPS right now is they're not getting the relief that they need from traditional allopathic treatments. They're not getting the relief they need from physical therapy. They're not getting the relief from medications. They're not getting the relief from blocks, and the list goes on and on. As a matter of fact, a lot of CRPS patients are actually getting worse with traditional treatments. So the one thing that I look at, and I think it was really important even in my own personal journey, was we're as individualized as our fingerprints. No one in the world has our fingerprint. So to look at a cookie cutter program that's supposed to be a one size fit all is just not going to work, and it's not going to cut it when we start looking at CRPS. So let's delve a little bit further into what we call holistic centered treatment, or a holistic approach to treating CRPS. So holistic centered treatment, one, it's an individualized approach. It's treating you as a whole and not just those symptoms. It's non-invasive and it's drug-free. And especially more than anything else, it's compassionate and caring. We'll put you in a healing environment and put you in a spot with people that care and they want the best for you. And it's created by somebody that actually lived with CRPS and understands what you're going through. That's me. So the program addresses all aspects, not just the symptoms, because CRPS, if we really think about how it's affecting us, it's not just the physical pain. That's a big part of it. But the reality is it's affecting us emotionally, mentally, spiritually, relationally, and the list goes on and on and on. So these are all the areas that we want to be able to address. These are all of the areas that we need to look at as you're moving forward. Now, one of the things that every CRPS patient has to deal with is this pain cycle. So if you look at the top of the diagram, disease, think about the diagnosis of CRPS. And when we get that diagnosis, not only is our head spinning, but, you know, we've got tension in our body. And the combination of the two things, we're not sleeping well, and add in the pain, and we have pain insomnia, and we're getting very little sleep. And then that's going to turn around and lead to stress and anxiety, and that's going to lead to other issues that can lead to depression and or PTSD. And then this cycle just continues going on and on and on. So one of the things that we have to do is be able to slow down that cycle to break the cycle. Now, most people living with CRPS or chronic pain are experiencing, unfortunately, a poor quality of life, feelings of depression, anxiety, stress, decreased hope, along with difficulties in just living our everyday life. So for kids, they're not able to go to school, they're not able to participate in sports, they're not able to hang out with their friends, they're not able to socialize, and these are key parts of your life. For adults, if you're working, you're doing it through a tremendous amount of pain. For others, you just aren't able to work on medication and the amount of pain that we're in, much less shopping or keeping up household chores. The list is endless on how CRPS affects us mentally, emotionally, and physically. So what's different about a holistic approach versus the traditional treatments that you've been doing? So holistic centered treatment is a multimodality protocol that's individualized to meet your specific needs, the specific needs of each patient, and then treating them as a whole. It's evidence-based, it's non-invasive, it's drug-free, it's an option that's really helping CRPS patients regain function and regain their lives, and many are gaining long-term remission. So what I want to start with as we delve into that holistic approach a little bit further is really knowing that when we can understand the body, when we can understand the brain, and how everything is interconnected, then we can start to understand CRPS. Now, the brain is a very critical piece in this whole puzzle. So let me bore you for a couple of seconds with some medical lingo about the brain. So in the human, the cerebral cortex contains 14 to 16 billion neurons. And the estimated number of neurons in the cerebellum is 55 to 70 billion. Now keep in mind that each neuron is connected by a synapse, the way it's going back and forth, to several thousand other neurons. And the neurons typically communicate with one another by what they call long fibers or axons. And then we're going to start talking normal language and not medical here in a second. So this allows the messages to be sent as impulses or calls to action to different areas of the brain that target different areas in cells and in our entire body. So the brain is a really important piece when we're looking at CRPS. So the bottom line when we're looking at the brain is it's responsible for all the function in the body. It controls everything, our body temperature, our blood pressure, our heart rate, even our breathing. We don't have to think about blinking when we get a piece of dust in our eye. We don't have to think about breathing. We don't have to think about our heart beating. So let me give you a different metaphor. If you put your perfect car or automobile out in your driveway, what is that vehicle? Is it a truck, a van, a Volvo, a Porsche, a Lamborghini, a BMW? What is that vehicle? Now think about that vehicle that you dream of all the time or that you really want and put it out in your driveway. Now, if the engine's maintained of that particular vehicle, that's wonderful. But if for some reason or another it's not maintained and you go out to start your car, your vehicle, and it doesn't start, we have a problem. And that's the same type of thing that when we come and start looking at the brain with that perfect storm that we were talking about, that when we have a missed signal, a wrong signal that's being sent out, that's what's happening. The brain is in control of our entire body, just like the engine of your car and the electronics in the car. So if we don't maintain the brain And if the brain has hit that perfect storm where it's not balanced or in homeostasis anymore, then all of a sudden the brain responds, sending out the wrong signals, the wrong pain signals, the wrong response. And that in turn triggers that stress response that causes the brain to release hormones and neuropeptides and other neurohormones that affect every system in the body. So think about dominoes. I don't know if you've ever set up a bunch of dominoes in a specific area where it looked like a circle or a spiral or made different designs with them. But the reality is you knock over the first domino and all of your dominoes are going to fall. Whereas if we've got space between that first domino and the rest of the dominoes, then we're good to go. Now, one of the big components that we're dealing with CRPS is fight and flight, that sympathetic overload that our body's working on. Now, the fight and flight response is the automatic defense system that's built into our body. It's like the alarm system that when the fire alarm goes off, you know that there's an issue. But the problem is when it's not doing what it's supposed to and getting misinformation, it's like your fire alarm going off all day long where you just want to ignore it and you don't want to take it serious anymore. So our body is meant to go into fight and flight. It's meant to have this automatic response. So if we see somebody or walking down the road and we feel like they have a knife and they're going to harm us, we go into fight and flight. We feel the endorphin rush. We feel the tightness in our body and we get out of dodge way. But with the sympathetic nervous system, when it's activated and what's commonly known as fight or flight, it not only does that, but it releases hormones and neurotransmitters called adrenaline or epinephrine and neonephrine. They're all released, and its response is triggered by physical or mental stress. So think about CRPS and what does it feel like and the amount of stress that we're under each and every day. That's enough to continue to keep us in that whole fight and flight response. So the first step to addressing CRPS is not only knowing the functions of the body and the brain, but honestly to address fight and flight. And I think that's a big piece that most people are missing. Because when we can get the body out of fight and flight, then we can calm down the sympathetic overload, which allows us to start balancing the autonomic nervous system. And that plays a key role in your overall health when we really start looking at the health of the body. Think about it as weights and balances. So if we've got weights and balances and we have parasympathetic on one side and sympathetic on the other, it's okay to go up and down a little bit. But when we're in fight and flight, it's like having 10 stories between the parasympathetic and the sympathetic. It's impossible for our body to get back into balance and to balance each and every part that needs to be regulated and get into homeostasis. So one of the other things that I want to talk to you about, and I think there's more and more research starting to be done on the vagus nerve and how important it is to our overall health. So the vagus nerve is actually the 10th cranial nerve, and it's extremely important to us. It controls inflammation in the body, including nerves, GI function, the immune function. The list goes on as to what it controls. The vagus nerve starts up in the brain, runs down, all the way down through the diaphragm, and it's also known as the wandering nerve, and then it branches out into the gut, into the abdominal region. Now, it helps control that autonomic nervous system, that autonomic response that's supposed to be happening. Because we have the parasympathetic, which is rest and digest, and then we have the sympathetic, which is fight and flight. They're supposed to work in tandem. They're supposed to work together. And the problem is when we're dealing with CRPS, they are not working together at all. So by being able to stimulate the vagus nerve, it helps with the sympathetic fibers. When we can stimulate the vagus nerve, not only are we helping to release the endorphins for our pain, the serotonin for our mood, and the melatonin for our sleep, but we're also helping to balance out that autonomic system. Now, add that in to getting the body out of fight and flight, and it's a pretty good combination where you're automatically going to see those pain levels starting to diminish as you do that. So that's why stimulating that vagus nerve is an important piece to treating CRPS. And there's many different ways of stimulating the vagus nerve. Some people do it with actual adjustments. Other people use a abdominal breath, a belly breath, or some people call it a 4-square breath. You can stimulate the vagus nerve through mechanical means. There's more and more devices coming out to do that. But even something as simple as singing and humming can also stimulate the vagus nerve. So ultimately, being able to stimulate the vagus nerve is going to help your entire autonomic system. It's going to help your immune system and help with your overall function in your body. Another piece that's really important when we start looking at a holistic standpoint is neuroplasticity training. Now, neuroplasticity is a really big word, but it's pretty simple. Neuroplasticity has to do with the ability of the brain, what they call brain plasticity or neuroplasticity, and the ability to change the brain throughout your lifetime. So let me give you a metaphor or a picture that'll help make sense. We learn with repetition. For the first time you went out and rode your bike, not only did you need your training wheels on, but you also needed mom or dad running by your side. And then eventually they get tired of running by your side and they let go. And you look over your shoulder and holy cow, you're riding on your own. And then eventually your training wheels come off and your brain has learned how to ride that bike. Now you can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years and never get on that bicycle, and your brain is going to remember exactly what it is. That starts playing in there. But even more so, our brain, there's an old saying that when it wires together, it fires together. When it fires together, it wires together. And that's the same thing with our pain. When we're dealing with something consistently over and over again, it's wiring and firing together. It's creating that new neural network. But we have the ability through neuroplasticity training to lessen that imprint. So think about taking a walk on the beach, and every step that you take leaves one footprint in the sand. So when you deal with something once, it's like leaving that one footprint in the sand. Now, when you deal with something chronically like CRPS or chronic stress or everything else that comes with it, it's like putting your foot in that same footprint over and over and over again, and it gets deeper and deeper. You might as well grab your bucket and your spade and start digging your hole, because you're staying there and it's getting deeper and deeper. Now, somebody can finally give you a chair to sit in so that you can stop digging your hole. Then eventually we watch the waves and the surf come up on the sand and it evens out. It may take a while, but it evens out. The bottom line is our brain has that same ability. It has that same ability to rewire itself in a way that we can lessen that imprint. We can retrain the brain so that we're no longer dealing with all of the inadequacies, the wrong information, the wrong signals that are being sent out. So when we start looking at all of these different things that we work with from a holistic standpoint, we're looking at the whole individual. We're looking at a multimodality approach that's key to helping us address all of the aspects of CRPS. So that's neuroplasticity training. It's working with vagus nerve stimulation with a laser, with PEMF, with hypnotherapy, because it's a fantastic modality to get your body out of fight and flight, and to also work with neuroplasticity training. And a lot of people have a lot of misconceptions about that particular word, hypnotherapy. Think about it as nothing more than a guided meditation with positive suggestions put in place for health and well-being, and that's what you've got. But again, knowing how the brain and the body work together, the brain will not allow us to be in fight and flight and be relaxed at the same time. So this is a great tool that allows us to help get the individual out of fight and flight. And then, of course, there's biofeedback and even other modalities that are set in place depending on what that particular person needs and what's going to help them meet their particular goals. So a holistic approach to treating CRPS is ultimately looking at you as a whole. And if we start looking at a checklist of the things that need to be done, first and foremost, get out of fight and flight. It's virtually impossible to do on our own. We've all tried, but it seems very difficult. Addressing the vagus nerve, balancing the autonomic system, the ANS, using other tools that we're using to get you out of fight and flight and even stimulate the vagus nerve. When we can do those things, then that allows us to start breaking the pain loop, addressing coexisting conditions, reducing and controlling stress, anxiety, and depression, increasing restorative sleep because that's when our body heals, increasing overall sense of well-being, and providing you with the tools to live a fulfilled life. That's treating the whole person. Now, I want to take a few minutes and share a couple case studies with you because a lot of people, seeing is believing, or learning more or being able to delve into it can help answer some of those questions. So for the younger people that are diagnosed with CRPS, the youngest person I've treated so far is 7, and the oldest person I think was 84. I want to talk to you about a 14-year-old female diagnosed with type 2 CRPS, came in from out of country, and when she arrived, her average pain level, she would put it between a 9 and a 10, 10 being the worst pain imaginable. As a matter of fact, her parents had to bring her in a wheelchair because it was too painful to walk, and she also had pain outbursts because the pain was just overwhelming. Her sleep quality was horrible, again, 10 being the worst. This seems a little backwards, so she put it at 9 out of 10, 10 being the worst. Quality of life, she put it at 8 out of 10, 10 being the worst. Now, she completed an intensive with me, which is working with me for multiple days, working through all of the modalities and even doing a 90-day home program. But at the end of her intensive one-on-one time with me, at the conclusion, her pain level was at a 0 out of 10. And her sleep quality was at a 1, with 10 being worse, meaning she was sleeping through the night all of a sudden. And she put her quality of life at a 1 out of 10, 10 being the worst, because they actually were able to go to the beach. They were able to go watch, I think it was some type of ice hockey. I don't think it was a formal game, but it was something having to do with ice hockey, and that was her passion. So she is now 4 years out. She's continuing at a 0 pain level, and she's graduated from high school, starting college. She plays competitive ice hockey, field hockey, soccer. She's literally doing the things that she wants to do. So for the people that are out there saying that remission is a myth, that it's not possible, how do they reconcile that with people that are regaining their lives? What would they say to these people? What would they say to me? Because I too have been in long-term remission, pain-free. Now, one of the other case studies that I want to share with you is someone by the name of Shannon. Now, Shannon saw me, I think in May of 2018, with CRPS in her leg. Now, she had been seen at Stanford, at UCLA, and other top universities here on the West Coast. And essentially, they were throwing up their hands. They put a neurostimulator in her leg and not in the spine area to try and help block the nerves. And her pain levels were over the top. So I just want to show you a really quick video. It'll take a little over 2 minutes, but take a moment and watch this.
Traci, the video's not working.
Okay. So let me tell you about Shannon. So Shannon lived with CRPS type 2 for a total of 10 years. She was treated at Stanford and UCLA at many, many top facilities. And she eventually threw up her hands. Her husband found me and said, you know what, she needs help. And it took Shannon 6 months to make that decision to come and see me, because she looked at it saying, if Stanford can't help me and if UCLA can't help me, then what can this person do that the other places can't do? So the intensive that she went through was a 5-day intensive. And a lot of people look at that saying, how is it possible to regain my life in 5 days? Well, a 5-day intensive at the time is the equivalent of you seeing 4 or 5, maybe even 6 different practitioners over a 6-month period of time, because you're working with me one-on-one for about 30 hours during that week and being sent home with a 90-day home program. So these are the things that we want to look at. These are the things that we want you to see. Shannon was treated in May of 2018. We're now in 2020. She continues at a 0 pain level, and she is literally doing 5Ks. She's working out. She's actually back to work and doing all the things that she wants to do. And those are the big things that I want you to hear. I want you to hear that there is hope. I want you to hear that there is help. I want you to know that it is possible to regain your life following a diagnosis of CRPS. So a few takeaways that I want you to look at today is a holistic approach to treating CRPS means a more comprehensive treatment approach, because we're treating you as a whole and not just treating the symptoms. Number 2, treating CRPS with a multimodality protocol can help you regain those functional levels and even regain your life. And then looking at a well-rounded treatment program that's addressing your specific individual needs as a patient is key. And that's how you're going to get the positive outcomes. Next, looking at the important factors of how does the brain and the body, the biology and the physiology of the body work together. That's an important factor when dealing with CRPS. And lastly, it is possible for CRPS patients to regain function and regain their lives using a holistic approach that's non-invasive and drug-free. So I want to first encourage you to look at all of your treatment options. Talk to your physicians and your treating clinicians and find that treatment that's right for you. And more so, I want you to hear that there is hope and there is help out there, and that you're going to be able to find a treatment that can ultimately help you in gaining your functional levels that are so important. So are there any questions? Is there anything that you've got specific questions on based upon the talk or anything that we've discussed?
One person wanted the name of your book again, Traci.
Stepping Outside the Box, A Journey from Invisible Pain to Invincible Living.
There's another question about supplements, food, especially help for the brain, helpful for the brain.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, you need to talk to your prescribing physician, because if you're on medications, there are supplements that can help, but you also need to make sure that there's no pharmacological interactions with those. Diet supplements can all play a very important role. There's a lot of CRPS patients that have done anti-inflammatory diets that have been very instrumental in helping them to start decreasing those pain levels and helping from the inside out, so to say.
There's another question about, can you provide more techniques to go into the parasympathetic nervous system to activate it?
When we're dealing with the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, I think one of my main focuses on that is being able to get the individual out of the fight and flight, and that's looking at the sympathetic side. Because when we really start looking at the components of CRPS, it's that sympathetic overload, which is actually keeping people up there in fight and flight. So when we start decreasing that, again, think about weights and balances. We're okay to be here. When we're like this, that's what makes the big difference. And then again, with stimulation of the vagus nerve, then what we're doing is starting to balance that parasympathetic and sympathetic. So it doesn't have to go into a lot of other modalities and things of that nature.
I know when we talked, you talked about you're a hypnotist, you're an acupuncturist, and you use lasers. Could you kind of just talk about how they integrate into your treatment too for a moment?
Absolutely. I don't do acupuncture. That's the only thing I don't do.
Right.
I absolutely do use laser, and there's a lot of patients, CRPS patients, that are concerned about that. But when we look at different types of lasers that are out there, there are different classifications of lasers. The particular one that I use actually helps with decreasing inflammation, calming down nerve pain. We can put it on different settings and use different probes. So for example, with myself, I had multiple surgeries and reconstructive surgeries on my foot and ankle. So the same laser that I've got actually helped break up some of that scar tissue that was there. Because when we've got that buildup of scar tissue, it can actually push on the nerves and cause neuropathic pain above and beyond the CRPS pain. Looking at hypnosis or hypnotherapy, to me, it is a very useful modality, and a lot of people are afraid of it. There's a lot of misconceptions about hypnosis. But as I mentioned in the talk, think of it as nothing more than a guided meditation and putting in positive suggestions where you need them. Because when we can do that, and we know how the brain's functioning and how the body works together, hypnosis is a great modality to get the body out of fight and flight, because our brain will not allow us to be in fight and flight and be relaxed at the same time. So it's a great way to start making that transition and helping somebody to come out of fight and flight in a very easy, relaxed situation.
Mm-hmm. There's been some questions, Traci, about whether this is covered by insurance costs, though.
So right now, as of today, it is not. The intensive as it stands today is a 5-day intensive followed by a 90-day home program. The reason why I'm saying today is because I'm working with 3 different entities right now to set it up as an inpatient program. And as soon as we make that transition, one of the programs we're looking at is a 14-day inpatient program that will cover everything that I do. And then we're going to add in some other modalities like EMDR and things of that nature. When we make that transition, it will be covered by insurance. And that's been an uphill battle for us, is a lot of the insurance companies look at all of this and say, but it's not a drug, it's not a pill, it's not a surgery. But when we've actually submitted costs associated with CRPS, for example, a spinal cord stimulator can be anywhere from, depending on how it's done in the model and et cetera, anywhere from $30,000 to $100,000. But yet, when we look at a holistic treatment option, they don't want to cover it, even though their cost savings can be tremendous. So it's about getting them the information and showing them how it's going to help them in the long run, at the same time how it's helping the patients and giving them outcomes, statistics, etc. So I would say in the next 60 to 90 days, we should have programs that are covered by insurance.
That's fabulous. That's really good. There's also a question, are there ways to stimulate vagus nerve via adjustment?
Yes, absolutely. There are, the other person doing a talk at the exact same time is Dr. Katinka. Not only does she do chiropractic adjustments, but I know that there are chiropractors in different areas of the U.S. and even abroad that do chiropractic adjustments that actually can stimulate the vagus nerve. Now, for somebody who can't tolerate it, an adjustment, meaning if you are having a lot of causalgia and allodynia, the reality is you may or may not be able to tolerate that. So there are different ways that we can stimulate the vagus nerve. One of the simplest that you can do on your own is an abdominal breath. Some people call it a belly breath. Some people call it a 4-square breath. There have been other write-ups that show that we can stimulate the vagus nerve by singing and humming. There's also other devices that will help us stimulate the vagus nerve through the inner ear and externally. So there's a lot of different ways of being able to stimulate the vagus nerve.
Great. And why don't you give me some examples of the positive thinking that you really stress in your book?
Well, I think some of the things that I really talk about are gratitude. And I think that's a big one. It's so easy when we're dealing with CRPS to feel like we're going down that rabbit hole, meaning we feel like we're in the depths of hell, is what I said earlier. And sometimes we really do feel like that mentally and emotionally. But when we can stop and make a shift, it's not going to change the CRPS, but when we can change our mind frame, then it keeps us from going down that rabbit hole. So gratitude is one of the biggest ones. If we can stop and even start our day with what are 3 to 5 things that we're grateful for. Or I've had a couple of people actually put together a jar. So every day they put one piece of paper in the jar of what am I grateful for today? And at the end of the month, they spend a couple of hours going through the jar. And it's actually a really good thing to do.
I think that's wonderful. Another question. I experienced remission for a 5-month period before symptoms returned in full. What advice do you give your patients right before leaving the program?
A couple of things. And the one thing I will say until the cows come home, so to say, is I still do something every single day. So even though I've been in remission for 7 years, the reality is every night before I go to bed, I spend 5 to 10 minutes doing something for myself. It can be breath work, it can be meditation, it can be self-hypnosis, anything that's going to help bring my stress levels down. The one thing that we have to understand with CRPS is it runs on fight and flight. So one of the good examples that I can give you is over the last 7 years, I've only had one time that I even had an inkling that I'd ever had CRPS. And that's when my former husband had been diagnosed with cancer for a 3rd time. And he was given 6 months to live. Needless to say, my stress levels were to the moon and back. And for about a 2-week period of time, I felt like I was running on that hamster wheel. I was, doing everything that I could for him, treating patients at my office, helping with our son, etc. And it was a really stressful time. And it was that time that around my foot and ankle, the same place where my CRPS started, I felt a really deep ache. It wasn't the same burning, stabbing, but it was a really deep ache. And I finally had to figure out what was I not doing that I would normally do. And that's when I doubled down on everything. I started doing a lot of meditation. I started using a lot of breath work. Anything that I had at my disposal that was going to help get me out of that fight and flight is exactly what I did. And guess what? It went away. Since that point in time, that's been something that I literally feel like I preach to people. So when somebody leaves my office, one, they're leaving with a 90-day home program. Two, I'm following up with them. Three, I'm asking them to follow up with me if they run into a roadblock or something that's giving them grief. But then I'm also teaching them techniques and tools, from meditation to self-hypnosis to something that we call glove anesthesia, which is whenever we've experienced something, we can re-experience it. So if we can imagine CRPS pain, that burning, stabbing pain, being at a 7, 8, 9, or a 10, and being able to drop it down by 3 or 4 points, that's a pretty darn big tool, and that's something that I'm teaching people. And then for some people, if they feel that biofeedback is helpful, I'm going to make sure that they have a sensor so they can actually use it on their phone and they can track what's working and what's not working. So there's a lot of different pieces that I'm giving to people when they leave the office so they're not on their own.
Right. There's a question about somatic meditation.
Meditation.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm not really sure where you're going with that. With everything that I do, it's all non-invasive and drug-free. If somebody's on a medication, I'm going to work with their prescribing physician, but that is not, that's not a road that I'm typically.
No, it's meditation, not medication.
Oh, meditation. Okay. So meditation, any type of meditation that you're doing, there's obviously a number of different meditations that are out there. For a lot of people that are dealing with CRPS, even though, for example, I've got somebody that I'm going to be treating next week, and he did meditation for probably close to a decade and was really good at it. Now that he's in the throngs of chronic pain and CRPS and pain levels that are over the top, his response to me is it's very difficult to get into that really relaxed spot again. So that's where it can be helpful to work with a meditation coach or even somebody that is very knowledgeable with hypnosis.
Right. I think there was a clarification on the question. It was that somatic meditation is used a lot for trauma-focused work.
It is. And one of the other things that I mentioned very briefly in a previous question is something called EMDR. So EMDR is typically done with a psychologist that is certified in EMDR. That is not myself. But I have worked with EMDR specialists. So it's eye movement desensitization. And what that helps is it helps take that emotional charge out of different memories or different things that you've gone through. So think about it, very stressful events or even PTSD. I think that that's a very helpful modality that could actually be very beneficial for a lot of CRPS patients.
Traci, would you accept questions from our community after the session? Not now, yeah. But I'm saying if email you. Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, I want to thank you. I think it's, we've been talking about having you on for years, and I'm so glad it finally happened. And make us aware of what's happening with the inpatient. I think it's fabulous. I mean, especially if it's covered by insurance.
Yeah, we'll definitely keep you in the loop on that. It's been an uphill battle for the last 6 years to try and get insurance to cover this. So we may have a facility on the West Coast and we may have a facility on the East Coast. So we're trying, in the long run, the goal is to get people trained in my modalities and my protocol all over the US and actually some in other countries too, because we've got to make a bigger impact when it comes to CRPS, and we need to take a different stance in treating it when medications aren't working.
I agree. And I want to just encourage everyone to fill out the survey that Alexis has done. Also, I want to ask you, come back on November 12th. It will be a different platform, be our Facebook Live, but we're having Richard Roth, who is from the Carolinas Pain Institute and is a fabulous clinician and researcher. And I'm real excited about him coming in. Also, I'd like to have you consider making a donation. We have had a link up there. And again, I want to thank Traci, and please go network. All right. Hit that button and meet other people. Thanks again.
Thank you.